Imagine being 19, full of dreams and freedom, only to have your life decided for you by strangers. Imagine walking down an aisle, not for love, but because your family's future depends on it. Now, imagine the man waiting for you. I sent he just any man. He's a millionaire cowboy whose presence alone could silence a room. But what happens next would leave the entire town speechless. This is the story of Clara, a girl with a paintbrush in her hand and a world of color in her heart. She dreamed of art schools in Paris, of canvases that would capture the golden light of her family's struggling ranch. But those dreams were fading, just like the paint on their old barn. Her family was on the brink of losing everything. The land that had been in their name for generations, the home filled with laughter and memories, was about to be swallowed by debt. Then came the proposition, a deal that felt more like a sentence. A marriage to save them all. The man was Cole Blackwood, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear across the county. He was a cattle baron, a millionaire whose empire was built on grit and silence. He was older, impossibly handsome in a rugged, intimidating way, with eyes that held the secrets of the vast plains he owned. He needed an heir, a respectable wife to stand by his side at galas and dusty rodeos. And he chose Clara. The town buzzed with gossip. They saw a gold digger, a young girl selling her future for a life of luxury. They didn't see the tears she cried into her pillow at night. They didn't see her packing away her art supplies, each brush a tiny splinter in her heart. They didn't understand that for Clara, this wasn't about money. It was about her family's survival, a sacrifice she was willing to make. The wedding day arrived under a vast, unforgiving sky. Clara felt like a ghost in her white dress, a stranger in her own skin. As she walked down the aisle, every eye was on her, judging, whispering. At the end of that long walk stood Cole. He was a statue carved from granite, his expression unreadable. He took her hand, his touch surprisingly warm but firm, a silent claim. When the pastor asked if anyone had any objections, the silence in the church was deafening. But the loudest objection was the one screaming inside Clara's own head. But then, as they were pronounced man and wife, something unexpected happened. As Cole turned to face her, a flicker of something other than cold business crossed his face. Was it regret? Pity? She couldn't be sure. The reception was a grand affair at his sprawling ranch, a world away from her simple home. Music played, champagne flowed, but Clara felt like she was underwater, the sounds distant and muffled. Later that night, in the enormous master bedroom that was now supposed to be hers, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. She stood by the window, looking out at the endless darkness, her reflection a pale, fragile figure. Cole finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. He told her this was a contract. She would have everything she could ever want: clothes, cars, a limitless allowance. In return, she would play the part of the devoted Mrs. Blackwood. There would be separate rooms. He had no interest in forcing a real marriage upon her. A strange sense of relief washed over Clara. The one thing she had feared the most was not going to happen. She had her freedom, in a way. A gilded cage was still a cage, but at least she could breathe. The days that followed were a quiet, lonely routine. Clara explored the massive ranch house, a beautiful prison filled with artifacts and art she could only admire from a distance. Cole's a phantom, gone before sunrise and back long after she'd gone to bed. They were two strangers living under one roof, their only interactions a few clipped words over a formal dinner table. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the suffocating silence of the house, Clara discovered an old, forgotten barn at the edge of the property. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light streaming through the cracks in the walls. And in the corner, covered by a dusty tarp, she found it. An old easel, canvases, a forgotten box of paints. It was like finding an oasis in a desert. Without thinking, she started to paint. She poured all her loneliness, her frustration, her trapped dreams onto the canvas. She painted the wild open sky, the rugged mountains, the fiery sunsets. The barn became her sanctuary, the one place she could be herself. She didn't know that someone was watching. Cole, returning early one day, was drawn by a flicker of light from the old barn. He stood in the shadows, watching as his quiet, timid wife transformed before his eyes. He saw the passion, the fire, the raw talent as her hands moved across the canvas. He saw the woman he had married, not the girl he had bought. He didn't say a word. But the next day, a brand new, professional-grade set of paints and canvases appeared on the porch of the barn. There was no note. Clara knew it was him. It was the first crack in the icy wall between them, a silent acknowledgement. An offering. Hesitantly, she began to leave her finished paintings in the main house. A vibrant landscape in the hallway, a portrait of a wild horse in the study. She was bringing life and color into his sterile, monochrome world. One evening, he found her in the study, staring at one of her paintings. "You're talented," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. It was the beginning of their first real conversation. She told him about her dreams of Paris. He listened, his gaze intense. He started coming home earlier. They talked not just about the ranch or social obligations, but about art, about dreams, about the people they were beneath the surface. Clara started to see the man behind the millionaire myth, a man burdened by his own legacy, as trapped in his way as she was in hers. She learned that his first love, a woman he was to marry years ago, had been a painter too. She had died in a tragic accident, and in his grief, Cole had locked away that part of his heart, surrounding himself with work and solitude. Clara's art had unknowingly unlocked a door he thought was sealed forever. He saw his past love in Clara's passion, but he also saw Clara for who she was: strong, vibrant, and incredibly brave. The town was still watching, but now the whispers were different. They saw the couple at the local diner, not sitting in stiff silence, but actually talking, laughing. They saw Cole Blackwood smile, a sight no one thought was possible. They saw the way he looked at his young wife, not with ownership, but with a dawning admiration and something that looked a lot like love. One night, standing on the porch and looking at the stars, Cole turned to Clara. He told her he was a fool. He said the contract was a mistake, and he wanted to tear it up. He didn't want a wife in name only. He wanted her. He wanted the artist, the dreamer, the woman who brought color back into his life. He told her if she still wanted to go to Paris, he would fly her there himself. He wouldn't stand in the way of her dreams, because her happiness had become his most important dream. In that moment, under the vast, starlit sky, Clara realized her own truth. Her cage had become a home. The stranger she married had become the man she couldn't imagine living without. She had walked down the aisle for her family, but now she wanted to stay for herself. She didn't need Paris anymore. She had found her world of color right here, in the heart of a millionaire cowboy and the rugged land they both called home. The deal made in desperation had led to a love that was more real and profound than any teenage dream. And that was the masterpiece nobody in town ever saw coming. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you next time. Maya stood at the edge of the dusty barn, her fingers trembling as she clutched the delicate lace of her dress. At 19, she had imagined her life so differently. She dreamed of laughing with friends under the sun, chasing her own small ambitions, maybe even traveling to a place where no one knew her name. But life has a cruel way of rewriting our dreams, and her family's crushing debts had rewritten hers into a nightmare. Her father's words still echoed in her mind, sharp and final. "This marriage will save us. You'll understand when you're older." But Maya didn't understand. How could she? The thought of marrying a man she had never met, a man whose wealth and reputation loomed larger than their small town itself, made her heart pound with a mix of fear and helpless frustration. Her life, her future, was a price being paid. The church was a sea of white flowers, the pews filled with the curious faces of the town, their hushed whispers weaving through the air like a net, and then she saw him. He was everything the town had said and more. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes as sharp and deep as a stormy river. He didn't smile, he didn't need to. The sheer force of his presence seemed to command respect, or maybe it was fear. His name was Luke Carver, the millionaire cowboy, a man who had built an empire from nothing. And now, in the eyes of everyone, he was hers. The ceremony passed in a blur. The vows she spoke felt like words from a stranger's lips, hollow and meaningless. Maya's thoughts drifted away, back to the life she had so carefully imagined, the life that now felt impossibly out of reach. Luke, on the other hand, was a statue of composure. He was calm, collected, almost detached, as if he too had accepted this arrangement as nothing more than a business transaction. A simple exchange of her future for his financial support. After the ceremony, the guests flowed into the grand hall for the reception. With every step she took, with every polite smile she forced, Maya's anxiety grew into a suffocating knot in her chest. She barely noticed the breathtaking luxury surrounding her, the chandelier that sparkled like frozen sunlight, the tables laden with exquisite foods she had only ever seen in magazines. It all felt like a beautiful prison. Finally, the moment arrived for Luke to present his wedding gift. It was a town tradition, and with a man of his stature. The rumors promised something extravagant, something that would keep the town buzzing for weeks. Maya's heart sank. Another grand display of wealth, another painful reminder that her life was no longer her own. It was a spectacle, and she was the main attraction. But when Luke stepped forward, the room fell into a sudden expectant silence. Maya held her breath. Instead of a diamond necklace or the keys to a rare sports car, he handed her a small, leather-bound journal. The crowd murmured in confusion. "It's yours," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unexpected softness that cut through the noise. "Write your story, your life. No one else's. Not mine, not anyone's. This is for you." Maya blinked, completely stunned. A journal? The millionaire had given her. A book of empty pages? Not gold, not riches, but something so simple, so profoundly personal, that no one in the room could quite understand it. But Maya did. In that single quiet moment, for the first time since her family had sealed her fate, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could reclaim her story after all, even if the world didn't understand how. As she opened the first page, her pen hovering over the blank sheets, Maya realized something profound. Her life was still hers to write, one word at a time. And the enigmatic man beside her, the millionaire cowboy, had just given her the key. But this was only the beginning. The real challenges lay ahead. Could she find the courage to live for herself in a life dictated by duty? Could she ever trust Luke Carver, a man hidden behind walls of wealth and a stoic reputation? And what secrets did he hold that the rest of the town couldn't see? The answers would come, but not without struggle, not without tears, and not without moments that would test every ounce of her heart. Her story wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. The days after the wedding were a blur. A whirlwind of polite smiles, endless questions, and the suffocating weight of everyone's expectations. I was Maya, the girl who married the town's richest man, Luke. I moved through the grand halls of his sprawling ranch like a ghost, my heart a tangled mess of fear, resentment, and a strange flicker of curiosity I just couldn't ignore. This wasn't my life, not the one I dreamed of. It was a contract, a transaction, a gilded cage. Luke was always there, yet distant. He wasn't the overbearing husband I had braced myself for. He didn't crowd me with false affection or flaunt his immense wealth in a way that demanded my attention. Instead, he gave me something I hadn't realized I was starving for: space. He respected my silence, my need to be alone, giving me a kind of freedom I hadn't known was possible in this new life. And in that quiet space, I started to see glimpses of the man beneath the polished cowboy boots and the million-dollar empire. He was the man who noticed I hadn't eaten and had a plate quietly left by my door. The man who saw me shivering on the porch one evening and returned with a soft, warm blanket without a word. I saw a tenderness, a thoughtfulness, and at times, an almost achingly human loneliness that mirrored my own. He wasn't just a name on a deed. He was a person, wrestling with his own ghosts. One evening, as the sun melted behind the rolling hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I found myself on the porch, my old journal in my lap. For the first time in weeks, I wrote down honest words that weren't for anyone else's eyes. "You can't imagine what it feels like," I whispered into the cool air, more to myself than to anyone. "To have a life chosen for you. And yet, to feel like it's still possible to choose your own story." Suddenly, he was there, appearing as silently as the twilight. Luke leaned against the railing beside me, his presence solid and grounding. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly, his voice a low rumble. "And braver than you believe." I looked up, startled by the raw sincerity in his eyes. There was no pity, only a deep, unwavering conviction. For the first time, I dared to ask the question that had been haunting me since the day I said I do. Why me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, why not someone who wanted all of this? Luke was quiet for a long moment. The wind rustled through the tall prairie grass, carrying the sweet scent of distant wildflowers. When he finally spoke, his gaze was fixed on the horizon, but his words were for me. "Because you're real," he admitted, his voice laced with a vulnerability I'd never heard before. "Because you don't pretend. You walked into my life with fire in your eyes, not dollar signs." I've spent my entire life building an empire, following the path my father laid out for me. But I've never had the courage to live my life for myself, until now. I need someone who sees me, not the wealth, not the reputation. Just me. My heart did a strange flutter, a confusing mix of fear and a fragile budding hope. Trust didn't come easily to me. Love wasn't a fairy tale, especially not one that started with a business deal. My whole life had been about compliance, not choice, and the scars ran deep. But in that moment, under the vast Texas sky, for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. The weeks turned into months. I began to discover the rhythm of ranch life, the early mornings, the smell of hay and leather, the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work. It was a world away from the one I knew, but it was real. I learned about the challenges of managing wealth with humility, not as a tool for power, but as a responsibility. And slowly, painfully, I found the courage to assert my own voice. To have an opinion, to say no. Luke and I were far from perfect. We argued. We clashed over everything from the color of the curtains to major business decisions. We tested each other's boundaries, pushing and pulling like a tide. He was used to getting his way, and I was used to fighting for my survival. But with every argument, with every challenge we overcame, we learned something new. We learned to respect each other. We learned to listen. We learned to rely on one another in ways neither of us had ever expected. He started asking for my opinion, and more surprisingly, he started listening to it. I started to see the ranch not as his, but as ours. The true turning point came during a harsh winter storm that swept across the plains with a vengeance. A lightning strike hit an old barn, and in minutes, a raging fire was threatening to consume months of hard work and a significant part of Lucas' livelihood. Chaos erupted. Men were shouting, horses were panicking. But in the middle of it all, something inside me shifted. Fear was replaced by a cold, clear focus. Without a second thought, I rushed into the fray alongside the ranch hands. I wasn't the fragile wife to be sheltered. I was coordinating, directing people to the water pumps, helping to move the terrified animals to safety, my voice cutting through the roar of the flames. I was taking decisive action, my mind working faster than it ever had before. When the fire was finally under control, we stood there, soaked to the bone, covered in soot, and utterly exhausted. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and rain. Luke pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me tightly. "You saved more than the ranch today," he said, his voice thick with emotion, his words a quiet murmur against my hair. "You saved me. From a life that could have been empty, from a heart that could have stayed closed forever." Leaning against him, I realized what love truly was. It wasn't about possession or obligation. It wasn't about grand romantic gestures or fairy tale promises. It was about this mutual respect, this shared courage, this freedom to be completely, utterly vulnerable with another person and to be cherished for it. And in that freedom, we were discovering a life, a partnership that neither of us could have ever imagined alone. Months later, we stood in the same small-town church where our journey had begun. The whole town was there, their eyes on us once more. But this time was different. I wasn't the scared, resentful girl being forced into a marriage. I was a woman. A woman who had faced her fears, reclaimed her story, and found her strength. I was a partner to a man who respected my mind, my heart, and my spirit. Luke turned to me, not with a ring, but with my old journal. It was thicker now, filled with the words that chronicled our journey, the fears, the struggles, the arguments, and the triumphs. He handed it to me, his smile gentle. "You wrote your life," he said, his voice full of pride. "And it's more beautiful than I ever imagined." The crowd, which had once whispered with judgments and doubts, fell silent. They weren't silenced by Luke's wealth or his power. They were silenced by the undeniable truth of what they were witnessing. The greatest gift Luke had given me, and that I, in turn, had given myself, wasn't a fortune. It was the courage to choose. The courage to love on my own terms. The courage to write my own story. I smiled, tears of gratitude blurring my vision. My life had been forced onto a path I didn't choose. But I had taken the reins. I had rewritten the narrative. I had turned what was meant to silence me into a voice that would echo with strength and hope. And in that quiet moment, with the wind carrying the scent of freedom, I realized the most profound truth of all. sometimes the greatest gifts aren't gold or silver. They are the courage to write your own life, no matter the obstacles. Maya's journey reminds us that even when life feels forced upon us, even when our circumstances seem impossible, we all have the power to reclaim our story. True strength isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about learning to fight in the rain. It's found in courage, self-respect, and the willingness to embrace love and life on your own terms. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it.